Chapter 1. The Myth of the Separate Mind. I believe in the phenomenon of mind reading completely and wholeheartedly. For me, it is no more mysterious than being able to understand the words rolling off someone's tongue. In fact, true mind reading is entirely natural. It is something every single one of us does, every single day, completely without realizing it. We just do it with varying degrees of success and very little awareness. But if we can shine a light on what we are actually doing in those quiet, unspoken moments, we can train ourselves to do it with breathtaking precision. Before we begin, however, we must absolutely discard the toxic pop culture version of mind reading. Mind reading is not a magical parlor trick, nor is it the egocentric demand that someone else should simply know how you feel without you having to express it. Think about a relationship you hold dear. Imagine a quiet evening at home. The ceiling fan is whirring overhead, cutting through the warm, heavy air of the approaching monsoon. One partner looks up and asks, "Are you sure you are okay with skipping the family dinner tomorrow?" The other partner smiles a thin, tight smile, looks down at their cup of hot chai, and replies, "Of course, it is completely fine. We can just stay in." The words say yes. The words are agreeable and compliant. But the body screams no. The shoulders are rigid, the breathing is shallow and trapped high in the chest, and the gaze is forcefully averted. The first partner, entirely focused on the spoken sentence, takes those words at face value and moves on. The very next day, an explosive argument erupts out of nowhere over something trivial. "You should have known I was upset about missing the dinner," one yells. This is the false, destructive version of mind reading. It is the assumption that people reside purely inside our heads. True mind reading is the profound ability to pay attention to that tight smile, those rigid shoulders, and that averted gaze, and gently say, "Your words say it is fine, but your body is telling me something else. Let us talk about it." To truly master this, we have to dismantle a lie that ancient philosophers sold to humanity centuries ago. They convinced us that the mind and the body were two entirely separate realms. The mind was painted as the lofty, invisible domain of pure thought floating somewhere above, while the body was merely the mechanical vehicle dragging it through the mud. This idea is devastatingly wrong. Modern science has definitively proven that the mind and the flesh are inextricably biologically fused. You cannot have a single thought without a physical reaction echoing through your entire system. When you think a thought, an electrochemical spark flashes across your brain. It carves a pathway, signaling your nervous system and flooding your bloodstream with hormones. Think about a deeply embarrassing memory from years ago. Perhaps a moment you tripped in a crowded street or said the wrong thing during an important meeting. Just visualizing it now, sitting right where you are, makes your heart beat a little faster. You might feel a flush of heat creeping up your neck or a sudden sharp tension in your stomach. The event is long gone, yet your body is living the thought right now. Your thoughts are deeply physical events. The most fascinating part is that this profound connection flows in the opposite direction too. Your physical posture aggressively dictates your mental state. Try this right now, wherever you are. Clench your jaw tightly together. Pull your eyebrows down into a deep, heavy frown. Stare hard at a single point on the wall in front of you. Now, curl your hands into tight fists. Hold that position for just 10 seconds. Notice what happens inside your mind. A subtle, fiery wave of frustration begins to bubble up in your chest. Your heart rate elevates slightly, and your hands might begin to feel warmer. You have absolutely nothing to be angry about right now, yet by simply arranging your facial and skeletal muscles into the physical blueprint of anger, you have commanded your nervous system to produce the corresponding emotion. You told your body you were furious, and your brain obediently followed suit. You cannot separate the flesh from the feeling. Because of this unbreakable bond, the vast majority of human communication is a silent, continuous symphony. We obsess over the perfect words to say, carefully constructing our sentences, yet our words are often just a tiny fraction of the message we broadcast. We leak our true intentions, our fears, our doubts, and our desires through the cadence of our breath, the shifting of our weight, and the fleeting micro-movements of our facial muscles. You are standing in a crowded, narrow market lane. The air is thick with the scent of roasted spices and the chaotic noise of auto rickshaws. You are negotiating for a beautifully woven silk sari. The merchant stands across from you. He crosses his arms, shakes his head firmly, and says, 5,000 rupees is the absolute lowest I can go. I am taking a loss at this price. If you only listen to his words, you walk away feeling defeated. But look closer at the whole human being. His feet are angled slightly toward you, keeping you in his space. His grip on the fabric is loose and relaxed, not white-knuckled with tension. The corners of his eyes lack the hard, pinched squint of genuine frustration. He is not dismissing you. His body is actively inviting the game to continue. You counteroffer, and the dance goes on successfully. Our unconscious minds are constantly absorbing this silent language from others, but because no one ever taught us how to interpret it properly, our unconscious makes mistakes. We feel a strange vibe from a colleague and assume they dislike us, completely misinterpreting their silent broadcast of personal, unrelated anxiety. We end up tangled in unnecessary misunderstandings. It is time to stop guessing. It is time to bring the unconscious into the light. By learning to consciously read the physical architecture of thought, you will not only understand others on a level they barely understand themselves, but you will also learn to master the signals you broadcast to the world. We are going to sharpen your observations until they become second nature. Chapter 2. The Architecture of Trust. Have you ever met someone for the very first time and felt an immediate, inexplicable click? The conversation flows like water, the silences are perfectly comfortable, and you walk away feeling profoundly understood. We often call this chemistry, brushing it off as a lucky alignment of the stars. But it is not magic. It is an architecture. It is the invisible, meticulously constructed bridge of mutual trust and openness known as rapport. Without this bridge, even the most brilliant idea, the most logical argument, or the most heartfelt plea will plummet into the abyss between two people. When you try to convince a skeptical client to buy your product, or when you are simply trying to get your exhausted teenager to listen to your advice, the actual words you use are entirely useless if you have not first laid down the foundation of trust. People simply will not listen to someone they do not feel connected to. The fundamental rule of building this invisible bridge is breathtakingly simple, yet it requires a deep, selfless empathy. You must adapt to how the other person prefers to communicate. Think of it like traveling to a foreign neighborhood where the dialects and rhythms of speech are entirely different from your own. If you insist on speaking only your native tongue at your native speed, the locals might eventually figure out what you want, but it will be exhausting for them. They will have to consciously filter and translate your every gesture. But if you take the time to learn just a few phrases of their language and adopt their local pace, their faces light up. The tension evaporates. You are signaling to their unconscious mind that you are making an effort to enter their world. By adapting your wordless communication to match theirs, you remove the cognitive burden of translation. You become incredibly easy to understand. More importantly, you become deeply likable. Human beings are naturally, biologically wired to prefer the familiar. We are the only creatures we will ever truly know from the inside out, which means our baseline for what is comfortable and right is our own self. Consequently, the people we are most drawn to are the people who remind us of ourselves. When you sit the way someone else sits, or express the same subtle physical rhythms they do, their unconscious mind receives a powerful, comforting message. This person is like me, therefore, this person is safe. This is not about erasing your own identity or abandoning your convictions. It is an act of conversational hospitality. You are simply offering to step into their house and take off your shoes before you ask them to listen to your ideas. Once that profound comfort is established, they will be vastly more open to stepping into your world and agreeing with your perspectives. How do we actually construct this wordless alignment? The secret lies in a subtle physical echo. When you are conversing with someone, you gently begin to reflect their posture, their angles, and their movements. If you are sitting side by side on a park bench watching the evening traffic and they cross their right leg, you cross your right leg. This is matching. If you are sitting directly across from them at a small cafe table and they lean forward on their left elbow, you lean forward on your right elbow, creating a perfect reflection. This is mirroring. But there is a crucial nuance here that separates deep human connection from a bizarre robotic imitation. If you instantly copy every single move someone makes, you will immediately trigger their psychological alarms. The goal is never to mimic. The goal is to gradually harmonize. To harmonize elegantly, you must use discretion. You soften the reflection. If the person you are speaking with aggressively crosses their arms tightly over their chest, crossing your arms just as aggressively might escalate the tension in the room. Instead, you adopt a representative gesture. You might simply rest your hands together in your lap or lightly cross your wrists on the table. You are honoring their closed, protective energy without reflecting the aggression. Another profound method of remaining invisible is to introduce a delay. When they shift their weight or lean back in their chair, do not immediately snap into the same position. Let the conversation breathe. Wait 20 or 30 seconds, continue listening intently, and then smoothly let your body settle into that matching posture. Their unconscious mind will still register the alignment, but their conscious mind will never detect the choreography. Imagine a young woman walking into the sterile, heavily air-conditioned office of a senior investor. She is pitching the business she has poured her life savings into. She is overflowing with kinetic energy, ready to talk fast, wave her hands, and project boundless enthusiasm. But she walks in and sees the investor sitting rigidly behind a massive teak desk, his back perfectly straight, his movements slow, deliberate, and constrained. If she blasts him with her high-octane energy, he will subconsciously perceive her as chaotic, unpredictable, and risky. He will shut down before she finishes her first sentence. But she is observant. She suppresses her urge to pace the room. She sits down, plants both feet firmly on the floor, straightens her spine to match his formal posture, and slows her physical movements. She enters his physical frequency. Within minutes, the investor's rigid shoulders drop a fraction of an inch. He feels an unspoken resonance with her. He feels that she is serious, grounded, and professional. Because she spoke his physical language, he actually hears her brilliant ideas. This profound physical resonance is not just for persuasion, it is a vital tool for healing and elevating the people we love. Because our bodies and minds are locked in that unbreakable biological loop, changing someone's posture can literally pull them out of a dark mental space. Picture walking into your living room to find your oldest friend slumped on the sofa after a devastatingly unfair day at work. They look small, defeated, with their shoulders rounded and their head heavy in their hands. Your instinct might be to stand over them, bubbling with toxic positivity, telling them to cheer up and look on the bright side. This aggressive mismatch will only make them feel terribly misunderstood, driving them deeper into their shell. Instead of attacking their sadness with joy, you must first meet them exactly where they are. You sit down beside them. You let your own shoulders drop. You lean forward, resting your elbows on your knees, mirroring their heavy, defeated posture. You sigh with them. For a few long moments, you simply share the weight of their physical world. You establish an undeniable, wordless solidarity. Then, once you know that deep connection is locked in, you initiate a gentle rescue. You slowly take a deep, full breath. You gently roll your shoulders back and straighten your spine. You lift your chin just a fraction and turn to look at them with a soft, open expression. Because you took the time to build the bridge of rapport, their unconscious mind will desperately want to stay connected to you. Without even realizing why, your friend will take a deep breath too. They will sit up a little straighter, they will lift their head, and as their chest opens up, the heavy, suffocating grip of their bad day will begin to crack and fall away. You did not have to argue them out of their sadness, you physically led them back into the light. This is the profound beauty of building wordless trust. When you offer someone the gift of your physical alignment, you are not manipulating them. You are offering them the deepest form of human validation. You are telling their nervous system that they are seen, that they are understood, and that they are not alone. And once you have mastered this physical harmony, you unlock the door to the next level of connection, where trust is not just seen in the body, but felt in the very rhythm of the air between you. Chapter 3. The Symphony of Connection. Once you have mastered the physical architecture of trust, you must attune yourself to the invisible waves that crash between human beings every single day. Connection is not merely a visual experience, it is an incredibly complex, auditory, and energetic symphony. When we converse, we are not simply exchanging dry data, we are playing instruments. Every time you open your mouth, you are broadcasting a melody composed of your volume, your tempo, your pitch, and your unique vocabulary. To truly read someone's mind and to guide them toward a place of mutual understanding, you must learn to listen to the music behind their words and then seamlessly tune your own instrument to match theirs. Consider the sheer power of the human voice. We speak at the exact same pace that we think and process information. If you are speaking to someone who processes the world with a slow, deliberate caution, and you approach them speaking a mile a minute, you are going to overwhelm their circuits. They will literally stop listening to your message because your rapid-fire delivery is making them feel anxious and rushed. Conversely, if you are speaking to someone whose mind moves at lightning speed and you drag out your sentences with long, meandering pauses, they will become incredibly frustrated, their mind racing ahead to the end of your thought, eagerly waiting for you to simply finish so they can escape. By consciously adjusting your speed to match the tempo of the person in front of you, you are doing something profoundly empathetic. You are telling their brain that your thoughts are unfolding at the exact same pace as theirs. You are sharing their internal reality. Think about a high-stakes telephone call. The voice is entirely stripped of physical context. There is no eye contact, no posture to mirror, only sound. Imagine you are managing a complex logistics operation and your phone rings. It is one of your field supervisors, and they are in a state of absolute panic. A massive shipment has been delayed, the local authorities are causing trouble, and the heat of the afternoon is fraying everyone's nerves. The supervisor's voice is high-pitched, loud, and incredibly fast. Your natural, managerial instinct might be to counter this chaos with a deep, slow, zen-like calmness to show them you are in control. But if you do that, the supervisor will instantly feel that you do not understand the sheer gravity of the crisis. You will sound aloof, disconnected, and condescending. Instead, a master of connection meets them where they are. You raise your volume slightly. You speed up your tempo. You respond with a voice that carries the same urgent kinetic energy, acknowledging the disaster. Once that vocal resonance is established, the supervisor feels heard. They feel you are in the trenches with them. Then, and only then, do you slowly begin to lower your pitch. You gradually decelerate your tempo. Because you are now locked in a rhythm together, the supervisor's voice will unconsciously follow yours down into a state of calm, rational problem-solving. You have altered their emotional state entirely through the manipulation of sound. This vocal harmony extends beautifully to the very words we choose to use. Every individual carries a unique linguistic fingerprint. We all have specific slang, cultural idioms, and favorite phrases that we lean on heavily. These personal phrases are like verbal comfort blankets. When you listen closely to a new acquaintance, you will start to notice these recurring words, these small rhythmic crutches they use to navigate a sentence. If you gently adopt one or two of these specific words and weave them naturally into your own replies, the effect is pure magic. You are bypassing their conscious defenses and whispering directly to their unconscious mind that you belong to their specific tribe. You are signaling that you not only hear what they are saying, but you perceive the very texture of how they frame their world. Deeper still than the voice is the silent, fundamental metronome of human existence, the breath. Breathing is the engine of the nervous system, and it perfectly reflects our internal emotional state. When we are relaxed, our breath is slow and deeply rooted in our diaphragm. When we are anxious or hiding a secret fear, our breath becomes shallow, rapid, and trapped high in the chest. Synchronizing your breath with another person is perhaps the most intimate and powerful form of invisible connection you can ever achieve. It is often incredibly difficult to see the rise and fall of someone's chest, but if you watch the subtle shifting of their shoulders or listen for the precise moments they pause to inhale while speaking, you can find their rhythm. Imagine sitting on a hard wooden bench in a crowded, noisy hospital corridor, the ceiling fans fighting a losing battle against the stifling summer heat. Beside you sits a dear friend, waiting for the results of a critical medical test. They are terrified. Their leg is bouncing, and their breathing is shallow and erratic. You cannot simply tell them to calm down. Words are useless against that kind of primal fear. Instead, you sit close to them and intentionally shift your own breathing to match theirs. You inhale quickly, you exhale sharply, you join them in their physical panic. Then, very gently, you take a slightly deeper breath. You hold it for a fraction of a second longer, and you let it out in a slow, smooth release. Because your physical presence is already anchored to theirs, their body will naturally seek to stay in rhythm with yours. Without a single word of advice, without any aggressive intervention, you act as a biological anchor, pulling their nervous system out of the storm and into a harbor of peace. Of course, not every interaction is about rescuing someone from despair. Sometimes you are dealing with a brutal clash of ideas, a furious disagreement that threatens to burn a relationship to the ground. When people are angry, they are actively looking for a wall to punch. They want resistance. They want you to stand in front of them and tell them they are wrong so they can channel all their fiery momentum into destroying your argument. This is where the profound art of conversational martial arts comes into play. Instead of standing like a rigid wall, you must become like water. You practice the art of agreeing to guide. You find the absolute core of their emotional truth, and you stand beside them, looking at the problem from their exact vantage point. Imagine a local community meeting where a neighbor is completely irate about a shared neighborhood issue. They stand up, face flushed, pointing fingers, shouting that the current situation is entirely unacceptable and that leadership has failed. The room tenses. The natural instinct is to fiercely defend your position and point out the flaws in their logic. But if you do that, the war escalates. Instead, you stand up, you match their intense energy level, and you say with total conviction, "I completely agree with you. If I were in your exact position, living right where you live, I would be just as furious as you are." The effect is instantaneous. You have removed the wall. Their forward momentum has nothing to crash into, so the anger simply dissipates into the open air. You have validated their reality. Once they exhale and their shoulders drop, you seamlessly pivot, tying your new idea to their reality using the simple linking word "and" instead of the combative word "but." You say, "And because we both want this neighborhood to thrive, here is a pathway we can explore to fix it." By replacing a word of reservation with a word of connection, you turn an adversary into a collaborator. You are the conductor of this silent symphony. You have the power to match a frantic tempo to build trust, to sink a quiet breath to heal anxiety, and to effortlessly redirect a raging fire by simply acknowledging its heat. By mastering these invisible waves of connection, you prepare the groundwork for an even deeper exploration. Because once you understand the rhythm of how someone speaks and breathes, you are finally ready to understand the profoundly different ways they actually perceive the world around them. Chapter 4. The Landscape of the Senses. We often talk about the human mind as if it were a massive, silent filing cabinet, storing dry facts and abstract data waiting to be pulled out at a moment's notice. But this is not how we actually experience life, and it is certainly not how we think. Our thoughts are not comprised of invisible text. They are vivid, multisensory recreations of reality. To understand how someone else thinks, you must first understand the fundamental truth that our brain barely distinguishes between an external event happening right in front of us and an internal memory being vividly recalled in our imagination. To truly grasp this, try a simple experiment right where you are sitting. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine you are standing in the middle of a bustling, vibrant evening bazaar. The sun has just dipped below the horizon, and the residual heat is radiating softly off the pink sandstone buildings around you. You can hear the chaotic, rhythmic symphony of auto rickshaws sputtering past, the distant ringing of temple bells, and the overlapping voices of street vendors. Now, imagine walking up to a brightly lit wooden cart. The vendor hands you a freshly sliced wedge of raw, unripe green mango, heavily dusted with coarse salt and bright red chili powder. Imagine lifting that wedge to your face. Smell the sharp, tart aroma. Now, imagine taking a deep, firm bite into the crisp flesh, the intense, acidic sourness exploding across your tongue, instantly mingling with the fiery heat of the chili. If you truly immersed yourself in that scenario, your mouth is almost certainly watering right now, your jaw might be slightly tingling, and your facial muscles may have twitched. There is no mango. There is no bazaar. You did nothing but use your internal sensory impressions, yet your brain immediately sent biological signals to your salivary glands as if the experience were entirely real. This is the profound landscape of the senses. We use our senses of sight, hearing, and physical feeling not just to navigate the physical world, but to construct our internal thoughts. However, here is the secret that unlocks the minds of the people around you. While we all possess these senses, we do not use them equally. Every single person you meet relies heavily on a dominant preferred sensory processor to make sense of the universe. Some people are intensely visual, interpreting reality through a rapid slideshow of images. Others are auditory, experiencing life as a complex arrangement of sounds, rhythms, and dialogue. A third group is deeply kinesthetic, navigating the world through physical sensations, emotional weight, and visceral feelings. Finally, a smaller group operates neutrally, filtering the world through pure, internal, logical dialogue, stripped of sensory fluff. Imagine 3 close friends returning from a weekend road trip to the rugged hills outside the city. If you ask them how the trip was, their answers will beautifully betray their internal wiring. The visual friend will immediately look up, their hands painting pictures in the air, and say, "It was spectacular. You should have seen the way the golden light hit the valleys at sunset. The views were incredibly bright and colorful." The auditory friend will tilt their head slightly, their voice taking on a rhythmic quality, and say, "It was so peaceful. Just listening to the wind howling through the open windows and the crunch of the tires on the dirt roads. We had the greatest conversations." The kinesthetic friend will take a slow, deep breath, lean back, and say, "It was exhausting, but so grounding. The roads were rough and bumpy, but feeling the cool evening breeze on our skin after a long hike just felt incredibly right." They all experienced the exact same reality, but they processed and communicated it through entirely different sensory filters. Once you know what to look for, these internal processes become thrillingly obvious, revealing themselves in the very cadence of a person's body. A highly visual person processes thoughts as images, and because images flash through the mind instantly, they must speak incredibly fast just to keep up with their own brain. To fuel this rapid speech, their breathing becomes shallow and trapped high in their chest, and their movements are often quick and animated. An auditory person thinks at the exact tempo of normal speech, leading to a measured, melodic voice, often accompanied by a slight tilt of the head, as if they are listening to an invisible radio. A kinesthetic person, navigating the heavy, dense waters of physical feeling and emotion, moves and speaks slowly, taking deep, resonant breaths from their belly to ensure everything they say genuinely feels correct before they speak it out loud. But the most mesmerizing clue to someone's internal world lies in their eyes. The next time you ask someone a question that requires them to think, do not just listen to their answer. Watch the silent dance of their gaze. Neuroscience and behavioral psychology have shown that when we access different sensory sectors of our brain, our eyes physically move in specific directions. When a visually dominant person is trying to remember the color of their childhood bicycle, or trying to imagine what their living room would look like painted a different color, their eyes will involuntarily dart upward, either to the left or the right. They are literally looking up at the movie screen in their mind to observe the image. When an auditory person is trying to recall the exact melody of a song, or imagining the sound of an alarm clock, their eyes will track horizontally, moving straight from side to side, aligning perfectly with their ears. The kinesthetic individual, when asked to recall the intense heat of a midsummer afternoon or the physical exhaustion of a long run, will almost universally cast their eyes downward and to the right. They are sinking their gaze into their physical body to retrieve the emotional and tactile sensation. And the neutral, logical thinker, when engaged in a fierce internal debate or calculating a complex problem, will cast their eyes downward and to the left, retreating into the private sanctuary of their internal dialogue. By simply observing where a person's eyes travel in the moments before they speak, you are granted a silent backstage pass to the exact machinery they are using to construct their reality. This knowledge fundamentally transforms how you communicate. If you are sitting across a negotiation table from someone who speaks rapidly, breathes shallowly, and frequently looks up, you know you are dealing with a visual processor. If you try to convince them by saying, "I want you to hear what I am saying, let us build a solid foundation," your words will bounce off them. They cannot picture a sound, and a foundation is a heavy kinesthetic concept. You are speaking a foreign language. To capture their mind, you must adopt their vocabulary. You must lean in and say, "Let us look at the bigger picture here. Can you see the vision I am painting for our future? The perspective is crystal clear." Suddenly, their eyes will widen. You have illuminated their mind. Conversely, if you are comforting a kinesthetic friend who is feeling overwhelmed, you do not tell them to look on the bright side or ask them to listen to reason. You slow your tempo. You deepen your voice. You say, "I know this feels incredibly heavy right now. It is a tough situation to grasp, but we will push through this rough patch and find solid ground. You validate their physical reality by using words they can actually feel. You are no longer just a voice in the room. You become a seamless extension of their own thought process. You step inside their sensory landscape, walking side by side with them through the exact version of the world they inherently trust the most. Chapter 5. The Anatomy of Emotion. We spend an enormous amount of our lives analyzing our feelings, treating them as poetic, mystical experiences that float somewhere in our souls. We write songs about them, we write poetry about them, and we spend hours agonizing over them with our closest friends. But if you want to truly master the art of reading others, you have to strip away the romance for just a moment and look at the raw biological machinery beneath. An emotion is not a philosophical concept. It is a violent, instantaneous biological hijacking. It is a brilliant, primitive survival mechanism designed to bypass your slow, rational brain and force your body to act before you even have time to think. Imagine you are stepping off the pavement onto a wildly chaotic street, the heavy evening humidity clinging to your skin, the blare of horns surrounding you from every direction. Out of the corner of your eye, you catch a blur of motion. A speeding motorbike has swerved out of its lane and is hurtling directly toward you. If you had to rely on your conscious, analytical mind in that moment, you would be incredibly vulnerable. You would stand there, thoughtfully calculating the trajectory of the vehicle, assessing its speed, and contemplating the structural integrity of your own bones. By the time you made a rational decision to move, it would be entirely too late. But thankfully, your brain has a biological expressway. The visual data of the speeding threat bypasses the analytical centers of your brain and slams directly into your amygdala, the alarm bell of your nervous system. Instantly, the emotion we call fear is triggered. Your heart rate explodes, pumping oxygen-rich blood away from your digestive system and driving it powerfully into the large muscles of your legs. Your mouth goes instantly dry. Your pupils dilate to take in more light. Before you have even consciously registered the color of the motorbike, you have leaped violently backward onto the safety of the pavement. Only then, as you stand there shaking, does your conscious mind catch up and realize what just happened. The threat is gone, but it will take your body several long minutes to clear the adrenaline and return to normal. This is the true anatomy of an emotion. It is an automated physical response designed to keep you alive in a dangerous world. In our modern lives, we rarely face speeding physical threats or predatory animals, but our biological wiring remains exactly the same. We now trigger these massive, full-body responses through completely different mechanisms. A deeply critical email from your boss, a condescending tone of voice from a partner, or even the sudden, vivid memory of a past humiliation can trigger the exact same biological cascade as that speeding motorbike. Your pulse spikes, your muscles tense, and your body prepares for a fight that is entirely psychological. And here is the most dangerous part of this process. Once an emotion floods your system, it drastically warps your perception of reality. You become trapped inside the feeling, and your brain aggressively filters out any information that contradicts your current emotional state. Think about a fiercely dedicated project manager who is operating under the crushing weight of a massive, impending deadline. She has not slept properly in a week, and her nervous system is flooded with the biological markers of stress and anxiety. She calls an emergency team meeting. As she explains the dire situation, she notices a junior team member sitting near the back, staring down at the table, shifting uncomfortably, and failing to make eye contact. Because the manager is already consumed by anxiety and feels her authority is under threat, her brain filters this visual information through a lens of hostility. She instantly assumes the junior employee is silently mocking her, or perhaps guilty of sabotaging the project. She interprets his physical discomfort as a sign of disrespect. She lashes out, severely reprimanding him in front of the entire room. In reality, the junior employee is simply terrified of the intense pressure and is shifting uncomfortably because he is frantically trying to process the massive workload she just described. He is looking down out of sheer intimidation, not rebellion. The manager has made a classic, catastrophic error in human observation. She allowed her own overwhelming emotional state to blind her to the actual context of the situation. When you are consumed by an emotion, everything looks like fuel for that emotion. To be a true reader of people, you must learn to step outside your own emotional storm and look objectively at the biological clues written across the other person's body. And the greatest canvas for these biological clues is the human face. Beneath the skin of your face lie over 40 intricate muscles. When an emotion triggers in the brain, it instantaneously sends electrical impulses to these muscles, commanding them to contract, relax, and shift to broadcast your internal state to the tribe around you. We spend our entire adult lives trying to suppress these broadcasts, layering polite social masks over our raw feelings. But because the biological impulse travels faster than our conscious desire to hide it, the true emotion almost always leaks out. By learning to read these fleeting muscular shifts, you gain access to the universal human emotional spectrum. Imagine sitting across from a close friend at a dimly lit cafe. They are telling you about a recent career setback, but their voice is perfectly steady, and they are insisting that everything is totally fine and they are eager to move on. But look deeply at the architecture of their brow. You notice that the inner corners of their eyebrows are pulling upward and slightly together, creating a very subtle, unmistakable triangular shape in the skin of their upper eyelids. They are smiling with their mouth, but those triangular eyelids are screaming a different reality. That specific involuntary upward pull of the inner brow is the absolute signature of genuine sadness. It is a muscle movement that is virtually impossible to fake consciously. No matter how bright their smile is, their biology is leaking a profound, unresolved grief. As the conversation shifts, you gently change the subject to a mutual acquaintance who recently received a massive promotion. Your friend nods politely, saying they are so happy for them. But for a fraction of a second, the skin around their nose wrinkles upward, and their upper lip pulls back, exposing their teeth just slightly. It looks exactly as if they have just opened a carton of milk and discovered it has gone completely sour. This is the undeniable biological signature of disgust. It flashes across their face and vanishes back into a polite smile before you can even take a breath. Disgust is a visceral, primal rejection, and whether it is triggered by spoiled food or a toxic person, the facial muscles react in the exact same way. If that disgust mixes with a feeling of superiority, it transforms into the most dangerous emotion of all, contempt. Contempt is the silent killer of human relationships, the feeling that you are fundamentally better than the person across from you. It manifests on the face as a bizarre, asymmetrical smirk. While the rest of the face remains relatively still, one single corner of the mouth tightens and pulls upward and slightly outward. It is a micro-sneer. When you see this single-sided tightening during a negotiation or a marital argument, you are looking at a deep, incredibly destructive lack of respect leaking out from the unconscious mind. You must also learn to differentiate between the explosive flash of surprise and the paralyzing grip of fear. Surprise is the fastest of all human emotions. When the unexpected happens, the eyebrows shoot straight up, the eyes widen to take in the maximum amount of visual data, and the jaw drops entirely open. But genuine surprise only lasts for a second or two before the brain processes the event and transitions into the next emotion. If someone keeps their jaw dropped and their eyebrows raised for 5 straight seconds while you tell them a story, you are watching a deliberate theatrical performance. Fear, however, is a sustained biological brace. The eyebrows go up, but they pull together tightly. The eyes widen, but the lower eyelids tense up rigidly. The mouth does not hang loose. The lips pull horizontally backward, stretching tightly across the teeth as the body prepares to either scream for help or gasp for the oxygen needed to run. These true expressions often appear as micro-expressions, lightning fast flashes of truth that occur in a 25th of a second. They happen when a person begins to feel an emotion, instantly realizes it is socially unacceptable to show it, and desperately tries to cover it up with a mask. For that tiny fraction of a second, the complete, raw emotion paints itself across their entire face. Most people blink and miss it completely, swept away by the polite words being spoken. But you are no longer most people. You are watching the silent symphony of the flesh. You are watching the biological truth leak through the cracks of the social mask. And once you train your eyes to catch these fleeting, beautiful flashes of humanity, the entire world transforms into a completely transparent landscape. Chapter 6. The Pivot of Perception. You now possess a profound, almost uncomfortable superpower. You have trained your eyes to catch the fleeting, involuntary flashes of raw emotion that dance across the human face before the social mask slams back into place. But this newfound vision immediately presents a profound ethical and practical dilemma. What exactly do you do when you see something you were not supposed to see? If you are sitting across from a colleague and you catch a micro-expression of deep, unresolved anger leaking through their polite smile, your first instinct might be to confront it. You might want to say, "You look furious right now. What is wrong?" This is the absolute worst thing you can possibly do. Blurting out your observations is an aggressive invasion of privacy. The person in front of you has not consciously chosen to share that emotion with you, and directly exposing their leakage will instantly destroy any trust you have built. Instead of feeling understood, they will feel naked, scrutinized, and defensive. Instead of confronting the emotion, you must use your observation to gracefully pivot your own behavior. You must alter the environment to either soothe the negative emotion or gently guide the person toward a more constructive state of mind. How you pivot depends entirely on the specific emotion leaking out. If you spot the triangular eyelids and heavy gaze of sadness, you must tread with exquisite care. Sadness requires a withdrawal of energy, a quiet space to process loss. You do not demand that they explain their grief, nor do you try to forcibly cheer them up. You simply soften your own energy, perhaps offering a very gentle, open-ended opportunity to talk, while making it abundantly clear that silence is perfectly acceptable. If you are in a professional environment, you might simply say that you are there if they ever need support, and then give them the dignified space they need to heal. If you detect the contracted brow and tightened eyelids of anger, remember that you rarely know the true source of that fury. It might have absolutely nothing to do with you. They could be internally reliving a frustrating commute or a fight with a spouse. To pivot away from anger, you must avoid defensive posturing. You use the conversational martial art of opinion aikido. You validate their unspoken frustration by finding a piece of their reality to completely agree with. You step to their side, absorbing their momentum, and say, "If I were facing these delays, I would be incredibly frustrated too." Fear demands an entirely different pivot. When you see the rigid, stretched lips and wide eyes of fear, the person's nervous system is screaming for an escape route. You must instantly become a pillar of stability. You assure them of their safety. If you are delivering difficult news at work, you immediately follow it by reinforcing their value to the team and outlining a clear, secure path forward. But there are two emotions that threaten to permanently dismantle a relationship: disgust and contempt. Disgust, that sudden wrinkling of the nose, is a visceral rejection. If you see it flash during a conversation, you must gently but immediately clarify your position, asking if there is something they feel is unfair, because allowing disgust to fester will poison the interaction. Contempt, however, with its asymmetrical, superior smirk, is the hardest mountain to climb. If someone truly feels they are fundamentally above you, logic and rapport are often powerless. Sometimes the most powerful pivot you can make in the face of deep, entrenched contempt is to simply walk away, protecting your own energy and letting someone else handle the negotiation. Knowing how to pivot allows you to salvage interactions that seem destined for disaster. Imagine you have recently taken over the management of a large, generational textile export firm here in the city. You are sitting in an incredibly important lunch meeting with a senior, veteran supplier whose cooperation is vital to your upcoming season. You want to impress him, so you launch into a passionate, rapid-fire pitch about your vision for the future. You paint grand, visual pictures of expanding into new global markets, speaking quickly and waving your hands to illustrate your grand design. But as you speak, you look at the older gentleman. He is staring at you with his eyebrows heavily contracted and pulled down, his lips pressed into a tight, thin line. Your heart sinks. He is broadcasting intense disapproval and possibly deep frustration. You realize in a flash that you have made a catastrophic error in reading your audience. You are treating him like a fast-paced, highly visual thinker, but his solid posture, slow breathing, and rigid stillness scream that he is deeply kinesthetic. He does not care about your grand, airy visions. He cares about the heavy, solid reality of the work. You are exhausting him, and he is rejecting your energy. A lesser communicator would panic, talk even faster to fill the silence, or simply accept defeat. But you know that it is never, ever too late to establish rapport. You do not stop talking, but you execute a massive, graceful pivot. You physically lean back in your chair, letting your shoulders drop to match his grounded posture. You intentionally slow your breathing. You drop the pitch of your voice, letting it resonate from your chest rather than your throat. You smoothly transition your vocabulary. You say, "But honestly, none of those future plans mean anything if we do not build a solid, reliable foundation right here today. I want to make sure this partnership feels secure and deeply beneficial for you." You watch in real time as the tension literally melts off his face. The contracted eyebrows relax. The tight lips soften into a genuine, comfortable smile. He leans forward, finally engaged, and says, "Now you are making sense. Let us discuss how we handle the heavy lifting." By reading his subtle emotional leakage and completely altering your own rhythm to meet his reality, you turned a disastrous first impression into a powerful, lasting partnership. You stepped out of your own ego and walked into his world. This is the profound beauty of reading minds. It is not about manipulation. It is about paying such incredibly close attention to another human being that you can catch them when they fall, guide them when they are lost, and speak to them in the only language they truly understand. Chapter 7. The Silhouette of Deceit. We are taught from our earliest days that deception is a moral failing, yet the truth is that we all lie constantly just to keep the machinery of society running smoothly. When a neighbor asks how you are doing, you smile and say you are perfectly fine, even if your heart is breaking and your world is falling apart. These polite, permissible falsehoods are the lubricants of human interaction, and they do not matter here. The kind of deception that truly matters, the kind that alters the course of relationships, businesses, and lives, is the high-stakes lie told for personal gain or to avoid a severe punishment. In these moments, the liar is deeply, emotionally invested in the success of their fabrication. This immense emotional and cognitive weight is incredibly difficult for the human brain to carry, and because the mind is working so furiously to maintain the illusion, it loses control over the body. The truth inevitably leaks out, casting a dark, unmistakable silhouette. To spot this silhouette, you must fundamentally change how you listen. The easiest way for a human being to lie is with their words, because we spend our entire lives practicing and refining our speech. We are slightly less skilled at lying with our facial expressions, and we are absolutely terrible at lying with our physical bodies. Yet, when we suspect someone is deceiving us, our instinct is to lean in and listen closer to the words, obsessing over the narrative. A true reader of minds does the exact opposite. You let the words wash over you, treating them as secondary information, while you focus your intense observation on the physical and vocal contradictions that betray the spoken message. You are looking for the profound disharmony between what the mouth is saying and what the flesh is broadcasting. There is a powerful myth that a liar will avoid eye contact, shifting their gaze nervously to the floor. Because this myth is so universally believed, a skilled liar will do the exact opposite. They will actively overcompensate, holding your gaze with an intense, unblinking stare to prove their manufactured innocence. But while they are staring you down, their autonomic nervous system is betraying them. You might notice that when they finally do blink, their eyes remain closed for just a fraction of a second too long. This prolonged blink is an unconscious, desperate attempt to literally shut out the world and escape the immense stress of the deception. You might also watch the subtle dance of their gaze before they speak. If you ask them a question about a past event and their eyes dart upward and to the side associated with creative construction rather than memory retrieval, they are actively building a fiction rather than recalling a fact. Imagine you are sitting in a sunlit, marble-floored courtyard in Jaipur, the dry heat of the afternoon pressing down as you negotiate the lease for a spectacular heritage property. The landlord sits across from you, his hands resting on a small, intricately carved wooden table. He assures you with absolute confidence that the roof has been completely reinforced before the monsoon season. You listen to his smooth, reassuring words, but you watch his hands. Normally, when people speak of things they have genuinely experienced, their hands are animated, unconsciously painting abstract pictures in the air to illustrate their thoughts. But creating and sustaining a high-stakes lie requires massive cognitive horsepower. Because the brain is overloaded, it shuts down unnecessary physical movements to conserve energy. The landlord's hands suddenly fall perfectly, unnaturally still. As the lie hangs in the heavy air between you, the internal tension within him reaches a boiling point. That nervous energy must find an escape route. Suddenly, his hand darts upward to cover his mouth, a deeply primal instinct to literally push the false words back inside his throat. Realizing this gesture exposes his anxiety, he quickly deflects the movement, turning it into a casual scratch of his nose, a tug at his earlobe, or an adjustment of his spectacles. Once the hand returns to the table, the gestural slips begin. He starts meticulously rotating his teacup, or tearing the edge of a paper napkin into tiny, perfectly symmetrical pieces. These small, repetitive, and entirely meaningless actions are the exhaust valves for the massive internal stress of deception. He may look perfectly calm on the surface, but his fingers are screaming that he is trapped in a state of high-voltage internal conflict. The silhouette of deceit also heavily shadows the human voice. When a person is lying, their emotional state physically alters their vocal cords. If the lie is driven by fear or the anxiety of being caught, their pitch will noticeably rise, their volume will increase, and their speech will accelerate. The rhythm of their sentences shatters. They might suddenly inject long, unnatural pauses into their speech, trying to buy precious milliseconds to construct the next phase of the lie. Alternatively, they might launch into incredibly long, breathless run-on sentences, terrified that if they stop speaking and allow you to ask a question, the entire illusion will collapse. Even the very structure of their language transforms. A liar instinctively wants to create as much psychological distance between themselves and the falsehood as possible. Instead of using direct, affirmative statements, they begin to define reality by what it is not. Instead of saying, "I reinforced the roof," they might say, "The roof was not left in a state of disrepair." They strip away personal pronouns, avoiding the words I or my, and retreat into vague generalizations, speaking of how everyone knows or nobody would do that. If you ask them to recount the story again later, they will repeat the exact same sequence of events, word for perfect word. A true memory is organic and fluid, remembered differently depending on the moment. A perfectly identical retelling is not a memory. It is a rehearsed script. When you see this silhouette emerge, when the hands freeze, the nose is scratched, the pitch rises, and the language turns evasive, you must wield your observation with profound care. Spotting these signs does not give you permission to slam your hand on the table and accuse them of lying. A direct accusation will instantly trigger their survival instincts, causing them to lock down in aggressive denial. Instead, you use the power of connection. You soften your voice, you lean in, and you ask a gentle, deeply empathetic question that requires them to step entirely off their rehearsed script. You invite them to clarify, allowing the truth to gently surface without a battle. Chapter 8. The Silent Dance of Attraction. Human beings are fundamentally, irrevocably social creatures. Regardless of our marital status or our personal histories, we possess a deep biological imperative to be acknowledged by other members of our tribe and to offer that acknowledgement in return. We often think of flirting as a conscious, deliberate game of words, a practiced charm offensive designed to win someone over. But true attraction is not spoken. It is a breathtakingly complex, entirely unconscious physical dance. In its purest form, flirtation is simply a highly concentrated, hyper-focused version of rapport. It is the wordless language our bodies use when our unconscious mind decides it has found someone profoundly interesting, long before our conscious brain even realizes what is happening. Imagine you are standing at the edge of a vibrant, crowded evening wedding reception. The air is heavy with the scent of jasmine and roasted spices, and the rhythmic thumping of music fills the courtyard. You are standing with a group of friends, holding a glass of iced chai, casually listening to a story. Out of the corner of your eye, across the sea of brightly colored garments, your unconscious mind locks onto someone. Instantly, the silent choreography begins. The very first thing your body does is open up the physical space between you and this distant stranger. Without even thinking, you shift your weight. You move your glass of chai to your other hand, ensuring that your arm is no longer crossing your body and acting as a physical shield. You have cleared the path. Next comes the exquisite mechanics of the gaze. You begin to discreetly observe them, casting fleeting sideways glances just long enough to register your presence. You wait for the exact moment they look back. When your eyes finally meet, you hold that connection for a fraction of a second longer than you would with a passing stranger. Then you look away. But how you look away speaks volumes. There is a deeply primal evolutionary signal embedded in this movement, particularly for women. Often, when breaking that initial charged eye contact, a woman will instinctively cast her eyes downward toward the floor for a brief moment before looking away completely. In the ancient hardwired language of human biology, lowering the eyes is a profound signal of harmlessness and an unspoken invitation. It communicates on a purely survival level that you pose no threat and that the space between you is safe to cross. Once that mutual visual acknowledgement is established, the human body begins to preen, exactly like a bird displaying its brightest plumage. You will involuntarily straighten your spine, pulling your shoulders back to appear more alert and vibrant. You might reach up to subtly adjust your collar, smooth down the fabric of your clothing, or tuck a stray lock of hair behind your ear. When you adjust your hair or touch your neck, you are instinctively exposing your wrists. Exposing the inner wrist or showing the open palms of your hands is an ancient biological gesture. It is the evolutionary equivalent of dropping a weapon, silently proving to the approaching stranger that your hands are empty and your intentions are peaceful. Then comes the challenge. You tilt your head slightly to the side, perhaps narrowing your eyes in a soft, evaluating squint. If you are a woman, you might unconsciously shift your weight and rest one hand gently on your hip. This posture is a silent physical dare. It broadcasts a powerful message across the room. I am intrigued, but do you have the courage to walk over here? And magically, almost inevitably, the space closes. Suddenly, the two of you are standing face to face, entirely unaware of the intricate, wordless negotiations that brought you together. Now that you are standing together, the architecture of intimacy takes over. In normal, polite society, when two people converse, they naturally stand at a slight 45-degree angle to one another. This angled stance protects the vulnerable front of the body and provides a comfortable psychological escape route. But when deep attraction takes hold, the bodies align perfectly. You square your shoulders and face them directly. To stand completely parallel to another human being is to expose your most vulnerable physical self. It requires an immense amount of unconscious trust. If this direct alignment happens too quickly and causes a spike of anxiety, the overwhelmed person will instantly reach up and touch their neck or their collarbone. This is a self-soothing gesture, a silent plea requesting a little more physical distance or a shift to a safer topic of conversation. If the comfort remains, the barriers continue to fall. If you sit down together, the legs uncross, planting both feet firmly on the ground to lean forward into the other person's space. Physical objects are pushed aside. If someone is wearing reading glasses, they might pull them off and push them up onto their forehead, removing the final layer of glass between your eyes and theirs. As the conversation deepens, the body begins to engage in incredibly sensual micro-movements. You might begin to rhythmically trace the rim of your water glass with your index finger or lightly touch your own collar. These are unconscious, symbolic caresses, physical manifestations of the desire for touch. The act of eating or drinking becomes highly stylized. You might slowly bite into an olive, trace a sugar cube with your lips, or take a deliberate, measured sip of your drink. It sounds almost theatrical, but the unconscious mind is deeply mesmerized by these subtle oral fixations. The body will even begin a process of unconscious undressing. A man might loosen his tie or unbutton the top button of his collar, while a woman might discreetly slip her heel out of her sandal, letting it dangle purely from her toes. Think of two high-level executives at an opulent corporate retreat. They are standing near a sweeping veranda, discussing supply chain logistics and quarterly projections. To anyone listening to their words, it is the driest, most professional conversation imaginable. But look at their bodies. They are standing perfectly parallel, 0 degrees of separation between their shoulders. The woman is resting her weight on one leg, her hand resting near her hip, occasionally tracing the delicate gold chain at her neck. The man has completely unbuttoned his suit jacket, his chest open and exposed to her, and he is mirroring her exact breathing rhythm. When she takes a slow sip of her iced water, his eyes track the movement of the glass. If you interrupted them and asked what was happening, they would swear on their lives they were only discussing profit margins. Their conscious minds are entirely oblivious to the fact that their bodies have been engaged in a passionate, deeply intimate dialogue for the last 20 minutes. Of course, this silent dance also has a devastatingly clear vocabulary for rejection. When the internal spark fades, or if the boredom sets in, the physical walls are instantly rebuilt. The body pivots away, breaking that vulnerable parallel alignment. The arms fold tightly across the chest, and the legs cross heavily, pulling the feet off the floor to create a closed, defensive loop. Eye contact breaks entirely, and in a final dismissive gesture, the bored individual will suddenly become intensely fascinated by something trivial, perhaps picking at a piece of imaginary lint on their sleeve or brushing invisible dust off the table. The biological connection has been severed, and moments later they will politely excuse themselves to speak to someone else across the room. We are constantly broadcasting our desires, our comforts, and our boundaries without ever making a sound. By learning to see this silent dance, you not only gain the ability to understand the true intentions of those around you, but you realize the immense power of your own physical presence. Up until now, we have focused entirely on observing these hidden realities and adapting to them, but observation is only the beginning. You are now ready to step across the threshold, moving from the passive interpretation of human behavior into the active, profound architecture of influence. Chapter 9. The Architecture of Influence. The word manipulation carries a dark, heavy shadow. We naturally recoil from it, imagining a sinister puppet master pulling the strings of unsuspecting victims. But we must strip away this negative value and look at the raw mechanics of human interaction. To manipulate simply means to influence someone enough to cause a change in their behavior, and the morality of that action is determined entirely by the result. Change for the better is positive. Change for the worse is negative. You have already seen how we constantly, unconsciously influence each other every single day. A warm, genuine smile manipulated out of a stranger, a friendly greeting in return. By matching someone's breathing, you subtly manipulated their nervous system into a state of calm. You are already an architect of influence. The only question now is whether you will leave your impact to chance, or whether you will learn to consciously guide the people around you toward their best, most empowered states of mind. To actively guide someone's reality, you must understand how to bypass the heavy, fortified gates of their conscious mind and speak directly to their unconscious. We call this process suggestion. When you present a proposal to someone's conscious mind, it acts like a strict border guard. It filters the information, analyzes it, looks for flaws, and makes a judgment. If you ask a friend to try a new restaurant, their conscious mind immediately raises questions about the price, the commute, and the menu. But the unconscious mind does not analyze, it does not filter, and it does not judge. It accepts propositions uncritically, taking them as objective truth as long as they do not violently clash with the person's fundamental self-image. If you plant a suggestion beautifully, the person will genuinely believe the new idea originated entirely within their own head. One of the most powerful and often most dangerous ways we accidentally plant suggestions is through the trap of negation. Consider this command. Do not think of a massive, brilliantly blue elephant. In order to process that sentence, your brain first had to construct the vivid image of the blue elephant. You had to see it in your mind before you could apply the abstract concept of not to it. And by the time you applied the negation, it was entirely too late. The image was already planted. The word not is a purely intellectual, abstract concept that lacks any physical counterpart in the real world. Because it is abstract, it is the absolute last thing our brains process, and it pales in comparison to the vivid imagery of the action itself. Think about a father teaching his young daughter to ride a bicycle down a narrow, dusty neighborhood lane. A few yards ahead, there is a large, sprawling banyan tree jutting out onto the path. The father, terrified that she will crash, runs behind her shouting, "Do not hit the tree! Look out! Do not hit the tree!" Every single time he says those words, he is forcing her young brain to visualize the tree. He is unconsciously turning that massive trunk into a psychological magnet. She becomes so intensely focused on the action of not hitting the tree that it becomes the only physical course of action available to her nervous system. She steers straight into it. The exact same principle applies to adults in high-stakes environments. If you tell a nervous colleague, "Do not worry about the upcoming audit," you have instantly forced them to visualize the anxiety of the audit. You have strengthened the very fear you were trying to erase. A true master of influence eliminates negations entirely. You must train yourself to speak in terms of what things are and what you want them to become, rather than what they are not. Instead of shouting at the child not to hit the tree, the father must point down the lane and shout, "Keep your eyes on the clear path." Instead of telling your colleague not to worry, you say, "You are perfectly prepared for tomorrow's review." An action is energy in motion, and it is practically impossible to stop energy by simply demanding that it cease. You cannot command someone to not think a thought. You can only divert that energy and give them a superior, positive reality to focus on instead. You can also plant profound suggestions by speaking on multiple levels simultaneously. Human communication is incredibly complex, and our unconscious minds are constantly scanning everything we hear for hidden meanings and associations. You can exploit this by embedding commands directly into your ordinary sentences. This requires you to seamlessly alter your tone of voice or establish intense eye contact precisely when you utter the hidden command. Imagine you are sitting with a client who is deeply stressed about a fluctuating market. You lean in, soften your voice slightly and say, "I know the numbers look volatile today, but it is important to feel completely secure in the long-term strategy." By subtly emphasizing the phrase, "feel completely secure," your conscious narrative remains focused on the market, but you have just slipped a direct, authoritative command past their analytical filter and straight into their nervous system. If you layer enough of these subtle vocal shifts into a conversation, their unconscious mind will obediently respond to the underlying melody, and they will begin to calm down without understanding why. Another brilliant method of invisible influence is the strategic removal of information. We naturally assume that the people we speak to share our exact definitions of the world, so we often take massive linguistic shortcuts. Advertisers and marketers are legendary for exploiting this. You will see a brightly lit billboard for a new luxury apartment complex that proudly proclaims a higher standard of living, or a beautifully packaged bottle of shampoo that promises new and improved formula for a better shine. The immediate, logical question is, better than what? Higher than what? But the advertisement intentionally leaves the comparison blank. The human mind absolutely despises a vacuum. We are biologically driven to find connections and make sense of our reality, so when we encounter a statement with missing information, we automatically fill in the blank ourselves. When a potential homebuyer reads a higher standard, their brain instantly compares it to whatever specific frustrations they currently have with their own cramped apartment. By leaving the information out, you force the recipient to mentally construct the rest of the sentence using their own deeply personal, highly relevant experiences. You do not have to convince them of anything, you simply provide the hollow framework, and they will gladly convince themselves because the interpretation they generate is undeniably true to them. This illusion of shared reality can also be manufactured through the use of broad generalizations. Words like all, none, everyone, and always are incredibly dangerous tools. They erase the vital, complex nuances of reality and create a simplified, easily digestible narrative. Think about how often you hear phrases like, "There is a massive public outrage over this new policy," or "Everyone is unhappy with the new management." How many angry people does it actually take to constitute an outrage? Perhaps it was merely 10 angry emails sent to a news desk, or 2 vocal employees complaining in the break room. But by labeling it an outrage, or claiming everyone feels a certain way, the speaker manufactures a sweeping consensus out of thin air. Human beings are terrified of social isolation. We do not want to be the sole outcast standing against the tide of the tribe. When we are told that everyone is fiercely critical of an idea, our unconscious mind pressures us to conform simply to protect our social standing. We abandon our own objective reasoning to align with a public opinion that might be entirely fictitious. If you want to guide a group toward a new initiative, you must be incredibly deliberate about the language of consensus you project, ensuring you are building confidence rather than accidentally generating a culture of sweeping, generalized panic. Influence is not merely a linguistic game. You are a walking, breathing suggestion. Every piece of clothing you wear, the speed at which you walk, and the physical space you occupy broadcasts a constant stream of commands to the world around you. Consider the story of a man recovering from a minor surgery in a bustling city hospital. It was a Sunday, a day when the administration famously refused to process discharges. But the man was determined to go home. He knew that if he asked the doctor while lying in a rumpled hospital gown, surrounded by scattered magazines and looking frail, his physical presence would suggest vulnerability and illness. the doctor's unconscious mind would instantly reject the request. So, before the doctor arrived for the morning rounds, the man took a shower. He dressed in crisp, well-fitted jeans and a sharp sweater. He meticulously packed all of his belongings into his travel bags and placed them neatly by the door. Instead of lying in the bed, he sat upright in a hard chair, vigorously typing on his laptop. When the doctor walked into the room, he was not greeted by a patient. He was greeted by a healthy, energetic man who was clearly ready to resume his life. The physical suggestion bypassed the doctor's administrative logic entirely. The man was discharged that very afternoon. You must ask yourself, in every room you enter, what silent commands your presence is issuing. You now possess the tools to reframe reality, to bypass defenses, and to subtly alter the emotional atmosphere around you. But there is one final, ultimate mechanism of influence left to explore. It is the ability to capture these fleeting emotional states and bind them to the physical world, allowing you to summon confidence, joy, and profound connection at the absolute snap of your fingers. Chapter 10. The Master Switch. You have traveled through the invisible landscape of human interaction. You have learned how to build the physical architecture of trust, how to read the fleeting biological leakage of true emotion, and how to gently pivot a person's reality using the subtle power of suggestion. But all of these profound skills lead to one final, ultimate capability. What if you did not have to wait for someone to naturally feel confident, joyful, or receptive? What if you could capture a peak emotional state, bind it to the physical world, and trigger it on absolute command? This is not science fiction. This is the profound biological reality of emotional anchoring. To understand an anchor, you must look at the mechanics of an imprint. More than a century ago, scientists discovered that if you ring a bell every single time you feed a dog, the dog's biology will eventually link the sound of the bell to the physical arrival of food. After a while, simply ringing the bell will cause the dog to salivate, even if there is no food in sight. Human beings operate on the exact same biological machinery, but instead of imprinting simple physical reflexes, we imprint profound, complex emotional states. An anchor is simply a physical stimulus, a sound, a touch, a smell, or a location that has become inextricably linked to a specific emotion in your unconscious mind. You are already walking through life completely full of these anchors. Think about the sudden, intense power of smell. You are walking down a busy street, and suddenly the distinct aroma of roasting cumin and simmering cardamom drifts out of a nearby window. In a fraction of a second, you are no longer an adult navigating a chaotic city. You are 7 years old, sitting in your grandmother's sunlit kitchen, flooded with an overwhelming physical sensation of absolute safety and unconditional love. Or consider the power of sound. A specific, upbeat pop song from your college days plays on the radio, and instantly your chest swells with the reckless, euphoric energy of youth. Conversely, hearing the specific ringtone of a deeply abusive former boss can cause your stomach to instantly drop and your palms to sweat, even if you have not worked for them in a decade. Your unconscious mind has bound those external triggers to your internal biology. Because the unconscious mind is constantly making these associations, physical locations can become massive, heavy anchors. Imagine a couple whose relationship has hit a painful, deeply frustrating phase. Late one night, sitting in bed, an exhausted disagreement spirals into a fierce, tearful argument. If they are wise, one of them will suddenly stop and say, "We cannot do this here. Let us take this out to the balcony or into the living room." They must move because if they pour all of that toxic, furious energy into the space where they sleep, the bed itself will become a negative anchor. Every night thereafter, the simple act of pulling back the covers will whisper a ghost of that anxiety into their nervous system, completely ruining their ability to find peace. We must be incredibly careful about the emotional anchors we accidentally plant on the people we love. Consider a well-meaning parent who struggles with physical affection. They rarely hug their child during normal, happy play. The only time they offer a tight, physical embrace is when the child has fallen down, failed a test, or is weeping uncontrollably. The parent's intention is pure, loving comfort, but because that specific physical touch only ever happens at the absolute peak of the child's sorrow, the hug itself becomes biologically anchored to sadness. Years later, a hug from that parent might inexplicably make the adult child feel heavy, drained, and depressed, even on a perfectly good day. But because these mechanisms exist, you can deliberately and beautifully manufacture them. You can capture a peak emotional state and intentionally bind it to a physical action, creating a master switch that you can flip when someone truly needs it. The process is astonishingly simple. You wait for, or gently guide someone into, a state of intense, positive emotion. Perhaps you are having dinner with a friend, and they are laughing uproariously, feeling completely confident and alive. Right at the absolute peak of that emotion, you introduce a unique, repeatable stimulus. You might place your hand firmly on their shoulder or use a very specific, distinct hand gesture while saying a word like fantastic with a highly unique, memorable vocal tone. You have just planted the anchor. Days or weeks later, that same friend might be sitting across from you, paralyzed by anxiety over an upcoming job interview. Their shoulders are slumped and their breathing is shallow. You do not argue with their fear. You simply reach out, place your hand firmly on their shoulder in the exact same spot, use that exact same hand gesture, and say the word fantastic in that exact same tone. Their conscious mind will just hear a word of encouragement, but their unconscious mind will recognize the biological imprint. Instantly, a wave of that previous joy and confidence will flood their nervous system, pushing back the anxiety and altering their posture from the inside out. You have literally reached into their biology and flipped the switch from fear to power. This is the ultimate tool for navigating high-stakes environments. The greatest negotiators and leaders never introduce their most challenging ideas when a room is tense. They wait for a moment of breakthrough, a shared joke, or a deep, resonant agreement. They anchor that feeling of mutual success with a specific phrase and a subtle physical gesture. Later, when they must present a difficult contract or a challenging pivot, they seamlessly fire that anchor. They wrap the new, challenging information in the biological warmth of the previously established trust, making the difficult reality vastly easier for the other person to accept. Perhaps the most life-changing application of this knowledge is planting anchors within yourself. You do not have to be a victim of your own shifting moods. You can build a customized emotional fortress. Sit quietly and vividly recall a moment in your life when you felt absolutely unstoppable. See what you saw, hear what you heard, and let that fiery electric confidence build in your chest. As the feeling reaches its absolute peak, press your thumb and forefinger together tightly. Do this several times, stacking the emotion higher and higher into that physical action. The next time you are standing outside a boardroom door, or preparing to have a deeply vulnerable conversation and your heart begins to hammer with nerves, you do not need to panic. You simply press those fingers together. The anchor fires, the confidence rushes back into your veins, your breathing deepens, and you step into the room entirely in control of your reality. You have reached the end of this journey, but you are only at the beginning of a profound new way of living. You now possess the keys to the human mind. You can see the invisible biological truth leaking through the social masks we all wear. You know how to build the physical architecture of deep trust, how to synchronize the symphony of the breath, and how to speak directly to the unconscious mind. With this profound insight comes an equally profound moral responsibility. You have the power to influence, to shape, and to anchor the emotions of everyone you meet. Do not use these extraordinary tools to conquer or to manipulate for petty gain. Use them to connect. Use them to heal the anxieties of the people you love. Use them to ensure that every single person who crosses your path walks away feeling deeply, genuinely, and powerfully understood.